Hello everyone, I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, it truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. My roommate is weird, really weird. When I first moved out of my parents' house, it felt like a small victory. A personal triumph wrapped in a tight budget and the need to find a place fast. I didn't have much saved, and the only option within my reach was a crumbling apartment complex in one of the worst parts of town. The building, to its credit, looked safer than most around it, and although the rent was high, I was desperate. I promised myself I wouldn't crawl back home. Determined to manage the cost, I put out ads for a roommate. Facebook, Reddit, local listings, and finally, Craigslist. Looking back, I now realize that was probably my first mistake. But hindsight has a cruel clarity that doesn't come until much later. When Jackson responded, he seemed like an ordinary guy, just a few years older than me, easy to talk to and in need of a place as badly as I needed help paying for it. At first, things felt oddly smooth. Jackson worked long hours and came home late, often after dark. He'd leave before I even woke up. We had weekends to hang out and grab food, and though I didn't know much about what he did for work, he never complained. That initial phase lulled me into a false sense of normalcy, but slowly, I started noticing patterns that didn't sit right with me. The trash was the first thing. He'd leave full bags near the front door but never take them out. They would sit there until the smell made it unbearable. The worst part was, I never looked inside them. Maybe I didn't want to know. I washed the dishes once and noticed the water turned murky brown, even though all he ever seemed to use were knives. Every time I asked him to clean up, he'd grow defensive, mutter under his breath something about getting caught, the police, then storm into his room and slam the door shut. It unnerved me, and I started to let things go just to avoid confrontation. Then came the truly strange behavior. Jackson never wanted to watch the news. If it came on, he'd quickly change the channel or shut the TV off entirely. At first, I assumed he had trauma, maybe PTSD from something he'd been through, but my curiosity got the better of me. When he wasn't around, I started reading the headlines. Murder stories, missing persons cases, nothing local but still. It made me wonder what kind of job would require him to be out at odd hours, wear gloves in the summer and keep knives in the sink. Publicly, I laughed it off, told myself I was being paranoid. Privately, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. He always wore sunglasses and a mask in public, even before masks were common. He avoided crowds and refused to go anywhere that wasn't absolutely necessary. And when we did go out, he always seemed to be watching the exits. I remember vividly the day I asked the landlord about the basement. Jackson would disappear down there for hours. I'd hear faint noises, nothing too alarming, but just enough to keep me awake some nights. The landlord hesitated, glanced nervously down the hallway, then told me about the time he thought he saw Jackson in the alley behind the building, hurting someone. He didn't get a clear look, he said, but the scream was unmistakable. He gave Jackson the basement keys because he was scared. That stuck with me, the fear in the landlord's voice, the kind of fear that made him hand over control of his own property. I considered going down there myself, but I couldn't do it. I kept thinking, what if I was wrong? What if my paranoia got the better of me and I accused someone innocent? But worse, what if I was right and someone innocent was dying down there while I sat upstairs too scared to act? Eventually I started watching Jackson more closely. I tried to track his patterns. He'd leave at random times, often coming back with nothing in his hands. He never talked about friends or family, never got phone calls, and sometimes I'd hear him talking to himself through the wall. Not just muttering, but having full conversations in a voice that wasn't quite his. It sent chills through me every time I overheard it. I began to avoid him altogether. I'd wait until I heard the front door close before coming out of my room. I'd eat quietly, stay out of sight, anything to keep myself off his radar. It's strange how quickly fear can become routine. You just adapt, until one day you look in the mirror and realize you're afraid to live in your own home. I wrote everything down in a journal, just in case. Dates, behaviors, little things. I kept it hidden in my mattress. If something ever happened, I wanted people to know it wasn't an accident. I started drafting a letter to my mum too. Not that she'd believe any of this. I never told her about Jackson. I didn't want her to worry, but the more I learned, the more I felt like I needed to leave. And yet, I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe it was the lease. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the hope that I was wrong. One night, I watched Jackson return home with his clothes covered in what looked like paint. Dark, almost brown. He walked past me without saying a word and locked his door. The next morning, he acted like nothing happened. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow after that. There's something deeply unsettling about watching a person you live with turn into a stranger. Every creak in the floor, every slam of a cabinet, it all began to feel like warning signs. I had dreams about him, violent ones, where I'd wake up drenched in sweat and afraid to go back to sleep. I stopped inviting anyone over. I didn't want anyone else to see what I was living with. Or worse, get involved and not make it out. One night, I went to knock on his door to talk to him, confront him, tell him it wasn't working. But I couldn't do it. I stood there with my fist raised, heart pounding, and walked away instead. I knew in that moment that if I pushed him, something terrible might happen. I didn't want to be on the receiving end of whatever he was hiding. The last entry in my journal was the night before I planned to talk to the police. I didn't know what I'd tell them, or even if they'd believe me, but I figured it was worth trying. I was tired of being scared. That night, I heard him come home later than usual. The door creaked open. His footsteps were slow, deliberate. I stayed in bed, eyes wide open, listening. And then he stopped outside my door, just stood there. No knocking, no sound, just breathing. I held my breath and waited. Eventually he walked away. I hadn't slept at all. The next morning the basement door was slightly open. I stared at it for a long time before shutting it quietly. I knew I'd never go down there. Not alone. Not ever. I'm writing this now in a hurry because he just walked in. I don't know if I'll be able to send it. I don't know if anyone will read it. But if you do, please, listen to that small voice in your head when something feels wrong. I ignored mine for too long. I thought I was being dramatic, that it was all in my head, but the truth is, I may not have much time left. If anything happens to me, know this. My roommate Jackson isn't who he says he is. He's hiding something terrible, and I think tonight I might finally find out what. He's unlocking the front door. I have to go. If this is the last thing I ever write, Mom, I love you. I'm sorry I didn't leave when I had the chance. Story 2. The peephole. I never gave much thought to peepholes before. You know, the little glass eye in the center of your front door, the one you squint through to see who's outside. It always seemed like one of those standard features that comes with living in a city. Not something to think twice about. Not something to fear. But now, every time I walk past my door, I can feel it watching me. That tiny circle of walk glass that once brought me a sense of security now sends a shiver down my spine. My wife and I moved into the apartment during a rough patch, hoping a change of scenery would help. She'd lost her job during the lockdowns and I was barely holding things together with my freelance gig. Los Angeles is an unforgiving place when you're down to one income, but Craigslist gave us a glimmer of hope, a listing for a charming old apartment in the Hollywood Hills. And best of all, the first month was free. We should have known that was too good to be true. The place was beautiful in its own offbeat way. It had that eccentric Hollywood charm, thick wooden floors, funky tiles in the bathroom, and a big old front door with a brass knocker. a dining area flooded with natural light, and a kitchen that looked like something out of a Wes Anderson film. We checked everything: windows, switches, locks, tried to be thorough. The landlord never met us in person, only spoke over the phone, and insisted it was a quiet building with good neighbours. We were told the previous tenants had moved out suddenly. I didn't think much of that at the time. The move-in went smoothly. A few friends helped us haul furniture up the narrow stairs. We wore masks, exchanged jokes about how much harder this would have been pre-pandemic, and that night my wife kept her promise: homemade dinner and a little wine. We toasted to fresh starts. But the next morning, we woke up to find the front door wide open. At first, we laughed it off. Thought maybe one of us had forgotten to lock it in the chaos of unpacking. It happens. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Always in the morning, always open. That's when I started checking the peephole more often. Not just out of caution, but out of instinct. And one night, everything changed. We'd ordered in Italian food to celebrate settling in, and while fooling around on the couch, I missed a text from the delivery driver. Knock at the door jolted us from our moment. I pulled on some pants and padded down the hallway. As I leaned in to look through the peephole, I felt a sharp chill ripple across my skin. At first, I thought something was wrong with my vision. But no. Something had been placed inside the peephole. Miniature, almost invisible to the naked eye, except through the warped lens. And what I saw made my blood turn cold. Through the lens, in unnerving detail, I saw a distorted image of our bed, my wife and I sleeping soundly, while a dark, human-like figure loomed at the foot of it, watching. The image was tiny, uncanny, like a photograph taken from inside the room. I opened the door in a panic. The delivery driver was standing there, clearly confused, muttered something about being late, and left the food before backing away. I ignored him completely and ran outside to inspect the door from the front. Nothing. No image, no distortion. The illusion only worked from the inside. When I brought my wife to look, she didn't understand my panic until I showed her. That's when the laughter stopped. We called the landlord and the police, filed a report, but what do you say? That someone installed tiny, disturbing images inside your peephole? The cops left, and our pasta went cold. My wife and I took turns sleeping in shifts that night. Neither of us wanted to close our eyes, and yet, the next morning, the front door was open again. The peephole was empty. No images, but the paint around the lens had been chipped away, like someone had removed something carefully. I knocked on every door in the building the next day, trying to talk to a neighbour. No one answered. No one peeked out. It was like we were completely alone. That night, we piled chairs against the door, double-checked the windows and agreed to stay up together. But we both drifted off sometime after 2 a.m. We woke up to the sound of the door creaking open. And when I looked through the peephole this time, the images were back. The same sleeping image. The same dark figure, but this time, its eyes were glowing white and they were crying. My wife sobbed quietly in the bedroom, curled under blankets, too afraid to come out. I stood there for an hour, staring through the peephole, too afraid to move, expecting the door to burst open at any moment. We never got a response from the landlord. I left 3 voicemails and 2 emails. Nothing. I bought a doorbell camera online and tracked its shipping obsessively. I needed proof. I needed to believe I wasn't losing my mind. The banging on the ceiling started a few nights later. Not loud, but consistent, like tapping fingers over and over again. We tried to ignore it, told ourselves it was just the old building settling, but it never stopped. And no one else in the building, if there were any others, seemed to be making noise. Or living, for that matter. On the 12th night, my wife swore she saw the doorknob turn, slowly, just an inch, then back again. I didn't see it, but I believed her. We started piling furniture in front of the door. The camera arrived 2 days later, and I installed it immediately. The next morning we rushed to check the footage, only to discover the camera had been turned away during the night. By whom? We didn't know. And we hadn't heard a sound. The feed showed nothing, just the quiet hallway. And the moment the camera tilted away, then hours of darkness. My wife begged me to break the lease. I started packing. But then something happened that I still can't explain. I woke up one night, alone in bed. My wife was standing in front of the peephole, not moving, just staring into it, her body frozen. I got up and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't flinch. I turned her toward me, and her eyes were blank, wide and staring through me. I shook her until she blinked and asked what happened. She didn't remember getting out of bed. She said she'd been dreaming of the dark figure. Only it wasn't at the foot of the bed anymore. It was in the hallway, staring back through the peephole, watching us, waiting. I sent her to stay with her sister the next day and promised I'd finish packing. But the door won't stay closed anymore. I lock it, bolt it, push furniture against it, and it still finds a way to open. Every morning, without fail, it swings open to reveal an empty hallway. I don't know what it wants, but it doesn't feel finished. Last night, I looked through the peephole again, and this time, I didn't see our bedroom. I saw myself, standing in the hallway, smiling, eyes white, crying, and behind me, just out of frame, something darker moved in the shadows. If you're reading this, and your door has a peephole, go look through it. Right now, tell me what you see. Story 3. The Craigslist Vacuum Buyer. It all started with something as mundane as a vacuum cleaner, one I inherited during a move out from my last apartment. Nothing special, just an average vacuum with average suction power. Something I listed on Craigslist for a modest $15 just to clear up some space and make a few bucks. I didn't expect anything to come of it quickly, but to my surprise, someone responded right away. A college student from CSU, she said, sounded polite over text. Even pulled up in a shiny $40,000 car, a bit extravagant for a vacuum, but I didn't question it. She wanted to haggle the price down to $10, which I didn't mind. I wasn't attached to the thing. I just wanted it gone, so I handed it over with a smile, happy to make a quick deal and move on with my day. I figured that would be the end of it, but no. That was only the beginning. A few hours later, I received a barrage of messages, pictures of the vacuum now in her apartment, apparently not working to her expectations. Dust bunnies still on the floor, a patch of crumbs still sitting under a table. She seemed to think I had misrepresented the product. I politely reminded her that it was an average vacuum, not a Dyson, that it worked fine when I had it. I even suggested she check if the hose was properly connected, just in case. She didn't reply to that suggestion. 2 days later, I got more pictures. This time, she dumped a small mountain of dirt onto her carpet and filmed the vacuum failing to clean it up properly. At that point, it was clear this wasn't about the vacuum. I tried to be patient. After all, I did sell it. Maybe she was genuinely having trouble. I told her again I'd be happy to refund her $10 once my parents left town. They were visiting for the week, and I had a full house. She didn't respond for a bit, and I thought maybe she'd cooled off. But I was wrong. That night, after returning from dinner with my family, we pulled into the driveway to find her standing in the middle of my front yard. The vacuum was shattered across the grass, its plastic casing in pieces, the hose torn, the motor exposed like a gutted machine. She was holding a note in her hand. I walked closer, stunned, and she shoved it toward me. "You can keep the money," it read, scrawled in thick, angry handwriting. We were basically catching her red hand. Her face burned with embarrassment, like she'd been caught in the middle of a temper tantrum she hadn't planned to be witnessed. I didn't yell, I didn't curse. I just told her to clean it up. Every last shard, every wire, every screw, and then I told her to leave and never come back. She hesitated for a moment, as if considering whether to protest, but eventually began picking up the mess, mumbling under her breath. The bizarre part? She had contacted me with a very professional email, complete with an elaborate signature listing all her degrees, accomplishments, and affiliations, a digital resume stuffed into a Craigslist exchange. Her ego had been bruised, not by the vacuum, but by the idea of being wrong, or worse, laughed at. When she finally left, the tension of my body didn't. I stood on the porch for a while, just staring at the spot where she'd stood, wondering how a simple Craigslist deal had spiraled into public destruction. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of person holds on to that much resentment over a $10 transaction. The email she sent after that got stranger. She never apologized, just more pictures of dirt and cryptic one-liners like, "Hope you're enjoying your clean house. Awesome messes don't vacuum up." I blocked her number and her email. I figured that would be the end of it, but Craigslist has a funny way of bringing out the wrong people at the right time. Weeks passed. I forgot about it. Sold a few more items, some speakers, an old bookshelf, and an unused keyboard case. That's when I had another incident. Two men pulled up in a dented Beta car to buy one of my audio mixers. Normal transaction, or so I thought. One guy handed me the cash, counted correctly, nothing weird. Then he asked if I had a bag for the mixer. I said no. He looked disappointed, but shrugged it off. His friend went to the car to get a bag and walked back up the driveway with a duffel bag in hand, his hand oddly inside it the entire time. Something didn't feel right. I carry a legal concealed weapon in my pocket when doing Craigslist deals just in case, and I instinctively rested my hand on it. I didn't say anything, just watched them carefully. The keyboard didn't fit in their bag. They left quietly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go down, and didn't. Then there was the guy who tried to pay me with fake $20 bills. It was a parking lot deal. Midday, nothing shady about the setting. He showed up a bit late, said he was interested in buying my iPad and accessories, total value around $1,000. When he handed me a stack of 20s, I noticed they felt too smooth, too flimsy, like thick printer paper. I fanned through them and stopped about 3/4 in. The backsides weren't even finished, just white, half-printed nonsense. I slammed the trunk shut, stepped back and stared at him. He bolted, but I had his number, license plate and the make of his car. My friend was with me and called the cops. They found him 2 miles away and arrested him on the spot. That, I thought, would be the wildest Craigslist encounter I'd ever have. But Craigslist has layers, strange people with stranger motives. Some want your money, some want your stuff, and some just want to be a part of your life for no clear reason at all. The vacuum buyer was unforgettable, because she wasn't just angry, she was unhinged. It was never about the vacuum. It was about control, about proving a point, about turning something mundane into something dramatic. I imagine she told her friends I scammed her, painted herself as the victim, made herself the hero of a story that was never a story to begin with, just a used vacuum and $10. But for her, it was theatre. Now I meet all Craigslist buyers at a bank parking lot during business hours. I bring a friend, if I can. I never invite anyone to my home anymore. And I never, ever list my phone number in the ad. There's something about anonymity that gives people a mask. Craigslist isn't just about buying and selling, it's a strange window into human behavior. You never know who's on the other side of that screen. Sometimes it's just a college student. Sometimes it's someone ready to break your vacuum in your yard just to feel something. Story 4. The basement neighbor. When my husband and I moved into this place, it wasn't because we loved it. It was because we needed to leave our old one fast. He had been carjacked in broad daylight, right in front of our old rental. After that, the neighborhood felt different. Every sound was suspicious, every shadow loaded with anxiety. So we started looking for somewhere, anywhere, to start over. Craigslist offered a small apartment that seemed like the right price in the right location. It was far from perfect, but it had charm. The building was old, really old, about 120 years. an old warehouse turned apartment complex, nestled in a historic downtown area of Florida. The moment we stepped in, we were captivated by the tall ceilings, massive windows, and beautiful light that poured in during the afternoon. It wasn't luxury, but it felt like peace. We took the top floor unit in a walk-up. It had one bedroom and a tiny kitchen, but that was fine for the two of us. I wasn't working at the time, so I stayed home while my husband commuted. He'd leave in the morning, and I'd sit at my computer looking for jobs, watching the sun move across the hardwood floors. After about a month, I started noticing something strange: banging. At first, it sounded like renovation. Maybe the downstairs neighbor was doing some remodeling. But the banging never moved. It was always in one corner, and it would go on for hours, like someone pounding a hammer into the same spot over and over again. I didn't think much of it, assuming maybe it was a pipe issue or someone putting in shelves. But then it kept happening. Not every day, but regularly. Too regularly. Eventually, I asked my neighbor across the hall about it. She didn't speak much English, but her hand gestures were expressive. She pointed downstairs and shook her head hard. Then she gestured toward her mouth, zipping it shut, clearly telling me not to speak to them. Her boyfriend Mike, who lived with her, was more open. He looked like an ex-cop, always had a serious look on his face. He told me he'd heard the banging too and had tried knocking, but no one answered. The apartment below us belonged to a family, apparently a mother, a father, and two daughters. My husband once saw them walking in a line, single file through their front door, like something rehearsed. I never saw them myself, only heard them, only heard that rhythmic banging, like someone trying to send a message in Morse code. I was sick one day in November, and my boss sent me home early. When I came into the apartment, the banging was louder than ever. But it wasn't just banging anymore, it was coming from the ceiling of their apartment, which meant it was the floor beneath me. I lay down flat on the hardwood and listened. Thump, thump, pause, repeat. I grabbed my phone and a small can of mace, just in case. Something about it felt more desperate than usual. I stepped into the hallway, uncertain of what I was going to do. And that's when I saw Mike, standing by their door, pressing his ear to the frame. He looked over at me and gave a small smirk. "Girlfriend made me come check it out," he said casually. "It's worse for you, I'm sure." I nodded and told him it felt like they were testing hammers down there. Mike knocked hard, thump, 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 and called out that if they didn't quiet down, he'd call the landlord. The banging stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. He high-fived me and jogged back upstairs like he'd just handled something simple, but it didn't feel resolved. I stared at the closed door, waiting, listening. After a moment, I went back up to my apartment, locked the door and leaned against it. Then it started again, louder this time, directly beneath me. It was so loud, I could feel the vibrations in my ribs. I jumped back, heart pounding, and retreated into the living room, curling up on the couch and waiting for my husband to get home. The banging didn't stop for hours. Months passed, with no sound. Silence replaced the chaos. I thought maybe they'd moved out. Maybe whatever was happening had passed. But then tonight happened. I had gone grocery shopping and was carrying bags up the 3 flights of stairs, one trip at a time. I dropped the first load inside the apartment and turned back for the rest. As I leaned over the railing to peer down to the first floor, I saw her, a girl, teenaged maybe, long black hair, Hispanic, wearing jeans and an orange tank top. She stood at the base of the stairs, fiddling with her phone. I didn't recognize her, and I watched from above, confused but not alarmed, until she moved. She didn't climb the stairs like a person. She fell forward deliberately and caught herself with her hands, but her arms were wrong. Too long. Her fingers bent backward in a way no human fingers should. Then she scrambled, launching up the stairs like a spider, limbs moving with unnatural speed and grace. I backed away, pressing against my door frame. Halfway up, at the second floor landing, She stood upright again, like nothing had happened. Her arms returned to her sides, her posture stiff but human. I gasped. She turned sharply toward me, startled, and darted through the door into the downstairs apartment with an unnatural boom that echoed through the whole building. I didn't know if she had slammed the door or if she had simply hit it at full speed. Either way, the sound made me freeze. I stood there, paralyzed, staring down at the closed door. There were no footsteps, no voices, just the silence again. The oppressive silence that feels like it's waiting. I backed into my apartment, closed the door slowly, and clicked the lock into place. I'm here now, sitting with the groceries still unpacked, staring at my front door. I have to pass that door to leave. There's no back exit, no fire escape. Don't know what I saw. I don't know who or what that girl was. But I know where she went. Back into that apartment. The one with the endless banging. The one no one speaks to. The one my neighbours warned me about with nothing but gestures and silence. I don't know what lives below me. I don't want to know. But the banging is back tonight, louder than before, and this time I swear it's not just random. It's following me. Thump, thump. Pause. Thump, thump. Like footsteps, like it's pacing beneath me, matching my own. I've turned off all the lights. I'm sitting in the dark, whispering into this recorder, unsure if I'll sleep tonight. Unsure if I'll ever feel safe in my home again. I want to call someone. I want to leave. But something tells me if I step into that hallway again, I won't come back. Story 5. The Immortality Project. I first saw the ad on Craigslist in the early hours of the morning. One of those nights where sleep wouldn't come, and the weight of my financial situation pressed down on me like an iron hand. I was 27, living with my parents and barely scraping by after a brutal divorce that drained both my wallet and my sense of self. The ad didn't stand out at first glance, just a plain block of text. The Immortality Project, seeking 8 participants for 2 days, $25,000 compensation, no experience required. The number caught my attention more than anything else. 25 grand for 2 days. No strings, no skills, just show up. It was too good to be true. But at 3 a.m, when you've got nothing left to lose, too good to be true sounds a lot like hope. The next day, I arrived at the address, 825 Smith Road. It was a clean brick building with immaculate windows, the kind of place that looked fresh off a magazine spread. 7 other men stood outside, all around my height, build, and general appearance. No women, no diversity, just 8 versions of the same man, give or take a few years. It felt like walking into a dream where everyone's face mirrors your own in unsettling ways. We didn't speak much, just exchanged glances and subtle nods. Eventually, a thin, older man opened the front door and motioned us inside without a word. The lobby was all white. White floors, white walls, a single black desk in the center like a punctuation mark in a sterile sentence. We stood there in silence until the door behind the desk opened, and out walked someone who made my stomach flip. The man who emerged looked like a perfect version of us. If we were 8 rough drafts, he was the final product. Flawless skin, sharp suit, eyes that pierced like sunlight. He smiled and introduced himself as Sam. Said he created the Immortality Project 12 years ago and had recently undergone the procedure himself. It worked, he said, gesturing to his impeccable body. He was the proof. He needed 4 of us to undergo the procedure and 4 to monitor the others for 2 days. I chose to monitor. I wasn't ready to gamble with whatever mystery was hiding behind that confidence. Jeff, a guy I'd talked to briefly outside, volunteered to be one of the participants. The others made their choices quickly. Sam led the volunteers through the back door, and we were left with the old man, who handed us forms to sign. The form was simple but chilling. Once you enter your room, you may not leave. Press the button for requests. We are not liable for injury. If you speak about this to authorities, we will find you. I hesitated, but signed, my name scribbled at the bottom like a contract with something ancient. We were handed additional forms for bank deposit information, and then we waited. 2 hours later, Jeff and the others returned, but they were different, quiet, hollow-eyed, their movements slow and calculated. Sam didn't return. The old man pointed us to our rooms. Each monitor was paired with one participant. Jeff stood to my right and I was led with him to a grey room with 2 small beds and a tiny TV that only played PBS and the local news. My phone was taken. I was officially cut off. Jeff lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling with glassy eyes. I tried to talk to him, but he didn't respond at first, just kept breathing, shallow and slow. Eventually, he turned to me and asked, "Do you feel them?" I didn't know what he meant. He held out his arm and asked me to place my hand over it. I did and immediately recoiled. It felt like something alive was crawling under his skin, like hundreds of tiny legs scurrying just beneath the surface. "They stop moving when you touch them," he whispered, "but they never go away." He said he didn't remember anything after signing the forms, just blackness and then voices whispering inside his head. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking, but his expression didn't change. He wasn't joking, not even close. That night he woke me up in a panic, shaking me, begging me to help him. "They won't stop talking," he cried. "I need them out of me." I tried to calm him down, but his eyes were wide and wet with tears. Eventually he collapsed on his bed and fell asleep snoring, just like that. It was as if his outburst had drained every last drop of energy from him. I couldn't sleep after that. Just lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the lights to come on. The food tray arrived the next morning. Eggs, toast, bacon. Jeff's tray was already empty. He gave me a green-toothed grin and mumbled, "Best thing I ever ate." I forced a smile and turned back to my plate, wondering if I would survive the full 2 days. The next few hours were uneventful, until the screaming started, muffled at first, then louder, coming from the room next door. I pressed my ear to the wall, just as the door to our room burst open. A man staggered in, vomited a stream of green sludge, and collapsed at our feet, begging for help. "It's crawling," he moaned. "It's inside me." A moment later, Sam appeared, calm, silent. He grabbed the man's ankles and dragged him away. As he pulled him into the hallway, the man's legs detached. Blood poured from the stumps, but then, disturbingly, the blood formed tiny creatures that crawled back into the body, writhing as they re-entered. The man let out one last scream before going silent. Sam shut the door without a word. Jeff and I didn't talk much that night. "So that dude's probably dead, huh?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't seem shaken, just tired. "I know what's inside me now," he added. "Wish I didn't, but I do." He told me he felt smarter, sharper, like he could do math he never could before, but he also felt hollow, lighter, but not in a good way. That night I fell asleep to the sound of his whispering. Not words I could understand, just a soft, rhythmic murmur, like a prayer to something dark, something waiting, something patient. The next morning, I was released. Sam greeted me at the front desk, cheerful as ever, handed me my phone and told me the money had been deposited. I looked around and saw that the building looked aged, mold on the bricks, cracks in the floor. It was as if the pristine image I saw on the first day had been a lie. "What's going to happen to Jeff?" I asked, unable to leave without knowing. Sam smiled. "He'll make more money than he can spend for the next 3 years. We're going bigger this time, worldwide eventually. You're the perfect mold. But we won't need volunteers for much longer." I didn't ask anything else. I didn't want to hear more. I went home. My parents didn't even ask where I'd been. I guess I didn't expect them to. I tried searching online for anything about the Immortality Project, but nothing came up. No names, no traces, just silence. I still feel the weight of those 2 days pressing against my chest when I try to sleep. I still remember the sound of Jeff's voice, thin and shaking in the dark. And I wonder, if I had taken the procedure, would I even still be me, or would I be something else, smiling through someone else's teeth, pretending not to remember what came before? Story 6, The Naked Sewing Pickup. Some Craigslist stories are unsettling because of what's said, others because of what isn't. But this one, it was about what I saw, or rather, what I didn't expect to see. My brother and I were doing a favour for his wife that afternoon. She had originally arranged to pick up some free sewing supplies from an older gentleman whose wife had recently passed away. Apparently, she'd been an avid seamstress, and he didn't want her things to go to waste. My brother's wife was excited. She was into crafting and quilting, and this was like a treasure trove waiting to be inherited. But work got in her way, so she asked us, me and my brother, to handle the pickup. It sounded easy. In and out. Just grab a few boxes, thank the guy, and leave. But nothing about that visit went the way we imagined. The address led us to a long dirt road out in the middle of nowhere. Trees flanked both sides, casting thick shadows on the uneven path. I remember the silence most of all, not even birds chirping, just the crunch of gravel under the tires and the occasional whisper of wind. The house itself was simple, old, wooden, weather-beaten, the kind of place that had seen better decades. The front door was open when we pulled up, and behind the screen door we could see a man seated at a computer desk near the entrance. He didn't look up right away. We knocked gently, hesitant, unsure whether to call out or just wait. Then he spoke, clear and friendly. "Yes, come in," he said, still facing the monitor. His voice had a worn-out warmth, like a teacher in retirement. So we stepped inside. From where we stood, the man appeared shirtless. That was the first odd detail, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe he was just lounging. It was hot out and he was at home. But then he stood up, and everything changed. The man was completely naked, head to toe. His thin, pale frame stood with no shame at all. He didn't flinch, didn't apologize, just looked at us with a tired sort of curiosity, like he'd forgotten what pants were. My stomach turned slightly, not out of disgust, but out of confusion, out of the surreal realization that we were now part of a scene we hadn't asked to be in. "Sorry," he said casually. "I like to be nude in the summer. No warning, no change in tone. Just a matter-of-fact explanation, like it was completely ordinary." I looked over at my brother, hoping for some kind of cue, some acknowledgement that we were sharing the same disbelief. He met my eyes with a look that said, "Yeah, this is really happening." But instead of backing out, he kept it professional. "Do you have the stuff?" he asked, trying not to let his eyes drift anywhere they shouldn't. The man nodded and walked deeper into the house. We stood there awkwardly, waiting in the living room while the sound of boxes being moved echoed from a back room. When he returned, he was holding 2 medium-sized boxes, but he held them low, really low, right near his waist, forcing us to avert our eyes more than once. It was like a twisted magic trick. Every time we tried to grab the boxes, we risked getting closer than anyone should to a stranger's body. Eventually, we managed to take the boxes from him carefully, without incident. As we turned to leave, I could feel the heat rising in my face, not anger, just embarrassment. We hadn't signed up for this. We were supposed to grab some supplies, maybe say thank you, and head out. Instead, we got a live viewing of something nobody should offer unsolicited. Outside, the air felt fresher, cooler, safer. We nearly jogged to the car, tossing the boxes into the backseat with more urgency than was probably necessary. Once we were inside, I let out a groan. "Why did we stay?" I asked, exasperated. "We should have just turned around and left." My brother didn't argue. He just shook his head and muttered, "I don't know, man. I really don't." As we peeled out of the driveway, kicking up dust behind us, I felt an odd combination of relief and unease. The whole situation had unfolded so strangely, so unexpectedly, that it felt like a scene from a dream. One of those slow, confusing dreams where you're not sure why you're there or how it's supposed to end. My brother's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and for a while we just drove in silence. Once we were back on the main road, the absurdity of it started to sink in. We laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous, because it was the only thing we could do to shake the image from our minds. Back at home, we didn't even open the boxes right away. We just left them on the dining table and went about our evening. But later, when my brother's wife returned, we told her the story, leaving out a few details, softening the edges. She thought we were exaggerating. "You're joking," she said with a smirk. We weren't, not even a little. And when she finally saw the discomfort on our faces, she stopped laughing. She opened the boxes in silence, inspecting the contents without a word. Inside were spools of thread, vintage scissors, neatly folded fabric, things that once belonged to someone loved, someone who had spent their time sewing and crafting. That made the experience even stranger. It felt like we had trespassed not just into someone's house, but into the ghost of someone else's life. The man had seemed harmless, just eccentric, maybe lonely, maybe lost without his wife. Maybe nakedness was his way of coping, of feeling something again. I'll never know. And maybe I don't want to. Some stories don't need sequels. Some doors are better left closed. Some favors left unfavored. That day taught me something simple and unforgettable. Always clarify the details, even when it's free. And maybe, just maybe, knock twice and look through the window before stepping inside. Story 7. The Magic Cards and the Cops. It started like any other Craigslist meetup. Simple, harmless and quick. I was selling sealed boxes of Magic the Gathering cards. Booster boxes, to be specific. If you know anything about trading card games, you know how valuable these can be to collectors or players. I'd arranged the sale with a local buyer through a series of polite messages. We agreed to meet in a safe public place, a Starbucks that was open 24 hours, in a decent part of town. It was one of those late-night transactions, the kind where everyone wants to be quick, get in and out without drama. What I didn't realize at the time was that drama had already parked itself outside. I arrived early, grabbed a coffee, and waited. The buyer messaged that he'd be a few minutes late. No big deal. The Starbucks was buzzing with people. Oddly enough, there were 3 police cars parked just outside the building. That felt unusual, but not alarming. Maybe they were grabbing coffee on a late shift. Maybe they were monitoring something unrelated. Either way, I didn't think it had anything to do with me. I sat calmly at my table, enjoying the coffee, when the buyer finally walked in. He was well dressed, polite, and had the calm demeanor of someone who'd done this kind of exchange before. He greeted me, confirmed he was the one from the listing, and then asked where the boxes were. I told him they were in the car, just a few steps away, and offered to walk with him. He nodded and mentioned that there was an ATM just down the street, and he'd like to withdraw the cash there. I watched him walk toward the ATM, and everything still felt routine. He returned with a thick stack of cash in hand, confirmed the total, and we proceeded to my car. He was parked just down the block, within eyesight of the Starbucks and the police cars. I popped the trunk, handed him the sealed boxes and took the money. And that's when everything went sideways. Within seconds, we were both surrounded. Lights flashing, voices shouting. Officers swarmed us from both sides like it was a sting operation. They ordered us to stand still to keep our hands visible. The buyer looked just as shocked as I was. They told us to place the boxes on the ground and step away from the car. We complied, confused, wide-eyed and stammering that it was just a card deal, just a transaction, illegal. But the officers weren't convinced. They said it looked like some sort of elaborate drug exchange. The cash, the sealed boxes, the nighttime meeting. It had raised all kinds of red flags for them, and now we were right in the middle of it. They asked to search our cars. My buyer tensed immediately and refused. His car was parked just across the street, and he was adamant that no search would happen without a warrant. The officers weren't happy with that response. I stood there holding my coffee, trying not to look suspicious, wondering how a game about goblins and elves had turned into a federal case. One of the officers picked up a box, carefully opened it, and began tearing into booster packs. I winced as he ripped through the plastic like it was packaging from a cereal box. "What exactly are these?" he asked. Before I could answer, something unexpected happened. Backup arrived, and with backup came salvation. One of the new officers stepped out, walked up and peered into the torn packaging. "Is that Magic the Gathering?" he asked. My heart skipped. "Yes," I said, almost too eagerly. "These are sealed MTG boxes. Collector items." He crouched down, looked over the cards, and suddenly chuckled. "Yeah, I play," he said. "Commander mostly. That's a good set." I nearly hugged him. He spent 10 minutes explaining to the other officers what trading card games were, how they worked, and why these boxes weren't filled with drugs or contraband, but with printed cardboard pieces, worth hundreds to the right people. Eventually they let us go, no citations, no warnings, just a very uncomfortable experience and a few bent booster boxes. The buyer and I stood awkwardly for a few seconds before exchanging a quick nod. "Well, that was something," he said. I agreed, thanking him for not bailing. He smiled, shook his head and replied, "Man, only in San Francisco could buying Magic cards feel like laundering money." We parted ways with a laugh, though I knew I'd never forget that tension, that sick churn in the pit of my stomach when 3 squad cars treated me like a criminal over something so absurdly innocent. Since then, I've done all my trades in daylight, at banks, with receipts, and with a clear understanding that no matter how harmless something seems, someone watching from the outside might see something completely different. Trading card boxes, when stacked neatly and exchanged for a thick roll of cash, apparently resembled drug deals more than you'd think. And I'll never forget the sight of a police officer peeling open booster packs like they were uncovering evidence. It was almost comical, if it hadn't been so nerve-wracking. To this day, I still sell cards, but I keep them in plain sight, label everything, and avoid parking lots at night. I also carry a printout of a few official Wizards of the Coast product descriptions, just in case. If a situation ever goes south again, I want my defense to come in both paper and mythic rare foil. And if nothing else, I hope my story warns other hobbyists. When it comes to public transactions, you never know who's watching, or what they think they're seeing. Story 8. The House for Rent Trap. Sometimes scams don't feel like scams until you're standing in the middle of one. That's what made this particular Craigslist experience so unnerving. I was moving to a new city, alone, and needed to find a place to live fast. Between juggling a new job and figuring out my way around town, I was already on edge. I browsed Craigslist every evening, scrolling through listings, comparing prices, and sending out polite inquiry. Then one night, I came across the perfect house. A single-story 2-bedroom rental with a backyard, hardwood floors, and a price that seemed almost too reasonable. At $850 a month, it was far below the going rate for the area. But the photos were immaculate. Sunlight pouring in through the windows, clean rooms, updated appliances. It looked like it had been pulled from the pages of a lifestyle magazine. I messaged the owner immediately. The reply came swiftly, almost too swiftly. They introduced themselves as a missionary who had recently been relocated overseas for work. They explained that they were looking for someone responsible, honest and quiet to take care of their beloved home while they were away. They said they trusted me already, even though we'd only exchanged a few words. That made me uneasy. They didn't ask for a credit check or references, just a promise that I would respect the space. I was flattered at first, thinking I must have made a good impression, but as I read the message again, something didn't sit right. It felt rehearsed, generic, like a script designed to make me feel chosen. Still, I wanted to believe it was real. The stress of apartment hunting had worn me down, and the thought of having a cozy home to myself was like a lifeline. They asked me to fill out a basic rental form and said they'd mail me the keys after I sent the deposit. That's when the red flag started waving harder. Mail the keys. No meeting. No tour. They said the house was move-in ready and that they trusted God would guide the right tenant to their door. I asked if a friend could swing by and look at the place in person. Suddenly their tone changed. They became agitated, accusing me of doubting their integrity. They said if I couldn't trust them, then maybe I wasn't the right person for the home after all. I hesitated. My gut screamed that this was a scam, but the photos haunted me. That kitchen, those clean white tiles, the garden with the hammock. I even imagined where I'd put my bookshelf and which corner the morning sun would hit. The fantasy had embedded itself deep in my mind, and walking away from it felt like walking away from a dream I'd already started to live in. I decided to investigate further. I reverse image searched one of the photos from the listing. The results floored me. The exact same house, same angle, same lighting was listed on a real estate website in a completely different state. It had never been a rental. It wasn't even available anymore. The scammer had lifted the images, crafted a fake backstory, and had been running a playbook designed to manipulate people like me. I felt sick, not just because I almost fell for it, but because I had let myself want it so badly. I thought about people who weren't as skeptical or as lucky. What if I had wired the money? What if I had packed up and driven to a house that didn't even know I existed? I imagined myself standing at that address, suitcase in hand, knocking on a door that would never open. A door that belonged to someone else entirely, maybe a family, maybe an elderly couple. Someone who would stare at me in confusion as I tried to explain that, according to a man in another country, I was supposed to live there now. It was a haunting scenario, and it made my hands shake. I sent one final message to the scammer, confronting them gently, without rage, asking how they could do this to people. They never replied. The listing vanished a day later, and I never saw it again. But the damage had already been done. The trust I had in digital communication, in listings that looked too perfect, was permanently fractured. From then on, I began using only verified rental platforms. I never trusted emails without phone calls. I never wired money. And I always demanded to see a place in person, no matter how convincing the photos or how urgent the promises. Eventually, I found a small studio on the outskirts of town. It wasn't glamorous. The floor creaked, the walls were thin, the view faced a brick wall, but it was real, tangible. It had a door I could touch and a landlord who looked me in the eye. I paid my deposit in person and got my keys that day. There was no story about missionaries or overseas relocations, just a worn-out building with character and a lease signed with a blue pen. And in a strange way, it felt safer than the pristine dream I had nearly chased into a trap. Craigslist, I realized, is a place of shadows and shapes. It offers glimpses of what could be, but not always what is. It invites the hopeful and sometimes the desperate into a maze where the wrong turn can cost you everything. I was lucky. I caught the lie before it swallowed me. But not everyone does. I still think about the house in those photos. I still see the hammock in my mind. But now, I recognize it for what it truly was. Not a home, but bait. Beautiful, convincing bait in a trap set by a stranger I'll never meet. So if you ever see a perfect listing with perfect pictures and a story that feels too polished, pause, look again, and remember my story before you mail your trust into the void. Story 9. The Missing Cat and the Craigslist Stranger. It all started with a missing cat and a sense of helplessness that only pet owners truly understand. My cat, Jupiter, was everything to me. 12 pounds of fluff and sass, silver grey with bright green eyes that always seemed to judge me from across the room. One morning, I noticed the window screen in my apartment had come loose, and just like that, he was gone. I spent days scouring the neighbourhood, stapling flyers to telephone poles, wandering the streets at night with a flashlight and a trembling voice calling his name. I knocked on doors, posted on every social media platform I could think of, and even checked the shelters daily. After 4 days with no sign of him, I made a last-ditch effort and posted on Craigslist. Last cat. Reward offered, no questions asked. It felt like shouting into the void, but I was desperate. To my surprise, someone responded that evening. Their message was short and a little vague. Saw a cat like yours near the empty lot off Granger Street. Looks well fed. Could be yours. That was it. No name, no contact info, just an anonymous tip. But it was the only lead I had, and I couldn't ignore it. I replied immediately, asking for more details or a picture. No response. Hours passed. Then a second message came. He hangs around near the old blue shed. Try late evening. I had never heard of a shed near Granger Street, but I looked it up on the map. It was about 20 minutes away, near an old industrial zone, partially overgrown with trees. I decided to go right then. The sun was starting to set by the time I got there. The area felt off, quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful, the kind of quiet that blankets abandoned places, where even the wind seems to hesitate. I found the lot easily enough, an expanse of cracked concrete and weeds. And sure enough, tucked behind a fence was a blue shed. It looked old, forgotten, like it hadn't been opened in years. I called for Jupiter, softly, walking the perimeter and flashing my phone light around. At first, nothing. Then I heard it. A soft, unmistakable meow. My heart nearly exploded. I followed the sound around the back of the shed and saw 2 green eyes glowing in the shadows beneath the rusted trailer. Jupiter, I whispered. Another meow. Closer now. I crouched down, reaching into the dark, calling his name again. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I froze. The kind of freeze where your muscles lock and even your thoughts become quiet. I turned slowly. A man was standing there, maybe 20 feet away, just on the edge of the lot. He was wearing a black jacket, hood up, hands in his pockets. I couldn't see his face, but he was watching me, just standing still. I stood up and called out. Did you send the message? He didn't answer. Didn't move, just kept standing there like a shadow pulled from the ground. I took a step back. The meowing had stopped. I turned to check under the trailer again, and when I looked back, the man was gone. I hadn't heard him move, no footsteps, no rustling, just gone. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the area, unsure whether to keep searching or leave immediately. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Don't worry, I'll keep him safe. I stood there in the fading light, the wind brushing past like a warning. I called Kanumba, straight to voicemail. I texted back, asking who they were, what they meant. No response. I ran back to the trailer, shined the light again, nothing. The eyes were gone. The meow had vanished like it had never existed. I circled the lot for another 20 minutes, calling, crying, pleading with the silence, but no cat, no man. Just that eerie message on my screen, still sitting there like a cold whisper. I drove home in a haze, glancing in my rearview mirror more than I should have. Every time I thought I saw something move in the distance, my stomach tightened. Over the next few days I received more messages, always from the same unknown number. He's doing well. He likes the sound of wind chimes. He misses you, but this is better. No explanation, no location. Just occasional, strange updates that felt more like taunts than reassurances. I reported the number to the police, but they couldn't trace it. I filed a missing pet report and even spoke to a detective about the encounter at the shed, but there was nothing they could do. The number eventually went dead, and the messages stopped. And Jupiter never came back. I still leave his food bowl out, still check the back alley some nights, hoping for a flash of grey in the shadows, but all that remains is a hollow silence and the chilling knowledge that someone out there wanted him more than I did and believed they had the right to take him. To this day, I don't know what happened. I don't know if the man lured him with food or if he used my Craigslist post as a trap. I don't even know if the eyes I saw were really Jupiter's. But something tells me this wasn't just a case of a lost pet. It was a lure, a test, a way to see who would follow a trail into an isolated place under the guise of hope. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I had been less cautious, if I'd brought cash for the reward, if I'd gotten closer to that shed. The thought terrifies me, not because of what I lost, but because of what I might have nearly found. Craigslist, I learned that day, isn't just a place for buying couches and finding roommates. It's a mirror of people's desires, and some desires wear friendly masks. Some use kindness to open the door, and some are just waiting for someone to care enough to walk into the dark alone.